We need congregations to encourage folks with the gifts and the graces for ministry to be listening for God's call upon their life. And so at some time in the year, we hope that your committee pays some attention to that whole idea of ministry as a vocation, not just talking to confirmation students about it, but it's okay. Not just talking to high school graduates about it, but that's okay. Many people who come into ministry these days come as a second career. So you might have folks in their 30s, 40s, 50s. We've seen people in their 70s feel called to ministry. And when they sense that call, if they have a group at church that encourages them, all the more. Helps them sort it out. Matter of fact, as people make their way through the process, from first sensing a call into ministry to entering ministry as an ordained or licensed person, the staff parish committee is essential because you become the first affirmation that's required. In other words, a person cannot pursue being a candidate for ministry if their local church staff parish relations committee will not affirm that decision. You're the first one. The second one also comes from your church at a church conference. A person cannot move forward as a candidate in ministry without affirmation from a church conference of the church to which they belong. That's where our ministers come from. So we hope you're lifting that up at some point. You'll see ordination is listed. I just think you should pay attention to ordination and the process involved, especially if you have a student or a candidate that's moving towards ordination. You want to understand that process a little bit, and when and if they are being commissioned or ordained, you want to be there, be a part of that. That happens at annual conference. The Ministerial Education Fund, well, it's listed in the manual as something that the Staff Parish Relations Committee should pay some attention to. It helps seminary students. What I would say is if you know of a seminary student, it'd be great to put in something into your church budget to help them so that you feel as though you have a role in assisting people into the ministry. Many people choose a career today based on the fact that the school came after them or the school offered scholarships. And what a world it would be if kids that were looking into school knew that to choose to pursue ministry would be supported by their conference or their district or their local church. Could be very encouraging. All right, so we're moving on here. And on to number 4, train for effectiveness. As a committee, I hope you'll do some training so that you understand the value of all these things that we've talked about and how to deal with some of the other things that come up with. First off, I want to make you aware of how important it is that your staff people take good care of themselves. Ministry is a 24/7 job. And if you aren't encouraging your staff people to take good care of their heart, mind, soul, and body, they'll burn out. They'll make mistakes. They'll misbehave. They'll struggle. They need encouragement. And all too often, staff people will say, in the church, when I take vacation, I hear complaints, I hear criticisms, I hear people going, oh, they're on vacation again. This is from a job that's 24/7. Now, you might not think they're always in the office, because they're not. But this is a job, this is a responsibility, this is a calling that never leaves one's heart and mind. You never stop thinking about the people and the lives that you're responsible for, that you could be reaching, that you ought to have reached, and then, wow, the ones that are being reached. When things are changing and the Spirit's moving, you never stop thinking about it. So taking a break and taking care of your heart, mind, soul, and body, very important. The staff parish committee ought to make sure that your pastor's taking their vacation. We have pastors that somehow have this kind of badge of honor. They say, whoa, I didn't take my vacation last year. Well, I'm sorry, but your pastors should take their vacations, because when you don't take vacation, it costs you too much. You need a break. So you want to encourage that. Vacations, I know they come up suddenly sometimes, but they really ought to be planned, and you should know when they are, and you should know who's going to be called when your pastor's away, so that if you get a call or a crisis takes place, you know who to call, who's backing up your pastor. And you do that cooperatively with your pastor. It's not your job or their job. You do it together. Oftentimes the minister themselves is the one that finds somebody to be backup, so that if there's a crisis, we know that there's someone you can call. Then I mentioned rule of Christ. Oh, I got one other thing on self-care. Don't want to miss this. The discipline affords our ministers a renewal leave of 1 month for every 4 years of ministry. Now, when I took my first year of renewal, it was after about 26 years of ministry. So I suppose I should have had about 6 months coming, but it doesn't work that way. But after 4 years of ministry, your pastor has every right to ask for a month of renewal leave. It's by discipline. That's not often lifted up, and you should be encouraging your pastor to schedule that, look for it. Doesn't mean that it has to happen every 4 years, but it's valuable, and it's a wonderful break. It's a chance for renewal. It's not just study and work and mission work or something. It's time away, and that's 1 month for every 4 years of service. Now, if your minister's only been with you for 2 years, and they say, I haven't had a renewal leave for the last 5-6 years, well, you start talking about when's the best time for it to come. Doesn't mean it's automatic that they should have it right away. This takes some planning. You want to schedule it at a time where it doesn't upset the life of the church, when it fits for the minister and it fits for you. But that's something that should be lifted up more often. So then your outline says Rule of Christ. And Rule of Christ is a training that we offer for staff parish committees and board members that helps us know how to resolve conflict. Rule of Christ training basically takes Matthew 18 and reminds us that when we have an offense, we need to go to the person that offended us and resolve the offense. Now, the place where the Staff Parish Relations Committee comes in is that sometimes a person needs you to go with them. Not all of us are able to go to the organist and say, you play too loud, and you've offended me. Well, that's kind of a silly example, but I've heard of sillier things that got in the way of relationships that needed to be healed. And you as a committee can sometimes help broker the conversations that need to take place for people within the church to restore the relationships that are broken. Sometimes this is around your pastor, of course, but other times it's around other staff people or other volunteers. And the Rule of Christ is a training that helps a church, at least the leaders in a church, understand and model good conflict resolution skills, like going to the source instead of going to my best friend, which only makes it worse, you see. That becomes gossip. Rule of Christ training is provided by the annual conference for every church that goes through a pastoral change, because the transition from one pastor to another is oftentimes, a period or a season when conflict might bubble up. And so we've provided that training for your leadership, not just staff parish, in those times of transition. Personnel policies. How do you deal with the people that are staff, and how do you deal with paid people? What's their vacation? How much sick pay do they get? What are your termination policies? How do you do evaluations? All of those things. Well, that should be written down so that you know how you will respond when circumstances arise. Because oftentimes when circumstances arise, emotions are high. And what we need is a process. We need some guides, some policies that help us. And so as a committee, you need to talk through these things about what do we do about volunteers that we're having trouble with, and how do we deal with issues that relate to a person who's on staff and now they're asking for this or they're wanting this. Personnel policies. Background checks. Staff Parish Relations Committee is responsible for the background checks for all staff people. All staff people on staff at a United Methodist Church, before they're added to employment, should have a background check. Then all people, volunteer or staff, who deal with and work with and are around ministries with children and youth, every one of them should have a background check. Now, we're talking about Sunday school teachers, we're talking about vacation Bible school workers, we're talking about chaperones, we're talking about people that take kids camping. But every one of those people who wants to volunteer as a volunteer lay worker with children or youth, you should have a background check on file for them. And that's the job of staff parish committee. Now, you can farm that out somehow, but you're responsible to make sure it's happening. And this, as you know, becomes important all too often, and we don't want to be behind the curve on this. We're talking about our children here. All right, number 5. This is the last one. I know we've gone over half an hour, but we're still within the 40 minutes, I think. Align with other United Methodist churches. Why does that matter? Well, partly because we have itinerant ministers. Partly because we're a connectional church. That the way we do things ought to be similar to what's being done in others so that together we're more effective. In other words, this whole thing about grow, reach, and heal, we're all going to do that. That's our focus. Making disciples by growing in our love of God and neighbor and reaching other people and healing brokenness, that's our focus. That's our focus over at the church that's to your west and to your east and the one that's to the north and to the south. We're going to be aligned. So we do that in that mission about growing and reaching and healing. And then we also want to work on one other one as staff parish committees, to see our job as proactive rather than reactive. That we are encouragers. We're people who strengthen ministers. We're people who nurture ministry. We support ministry. We respect those who serve in ministry. And that's a proactive thing. We work hard at that. That's all that planning and all of that job description and all that work at evaluations and taking seriously how to compensate and care for someone that's in ministry. We work hard at that, and we want to support and sustain ministers. And that's a proactive response. And that should be going on in all churches. So now we get down to something you probably knew, but it's the structure of the Staff Parish Relations Committee is similar in all United Methodist churches. Should be between 5 and 9 people. Between 5 and 9 people. And that should not include any people who are family members of staff, and it shouldn't include any staff people. In other words, if you have a paid secretary, they can't be on staff parish. Or if you have a paid secretary, your secretary's daughter cannot be on the Staff Parish Relations Committee. No family members. 5 to 9 members should be arranged. They should be objective people. I can't say enough about this. Now, you don't nominate them, but you usually know who's on the nominating committee. And your pastor chairs the nominating committee. And this is where some of our problems come from, because when a Staff Parish Relations Committee deals with sensitive issues, we must have objective, faithful people. If people cannot be objective, and if they refuse to be faithful, there's no place for them on the Staff Parish Relations Committee, because sensitive matters are discussed there. So this goes all the way back to the nominations process. People who are selected or nominated for the Staff Parish Relations Committee should be objective and faithful people. These are prerequisites. If you know that somebody's not able to keep confidences, or if you know that somebody's kind of prone to gossip, or you know that somebody's really got a kind of attitude about things and they have a hard time seeing things from someone else's perspective, well, they might be useful on a lot of committees, but probably not on staff parish. And that starts at the nominating committee level. Your pastor chairs that, and you should be strategic. Now, I'm not talking about putting all your pastor's favorite friends on staff parish, but I am talking about having objective, sensitive, faithful people on that committee. Because when they deal with the sensitive issues that come up in pastoral changes and in the midst of conflicts, you need strong, capable people to guide your congregation through those moments. So they should be arranged in 3-year classes. Why is that? That's so that on any given year, you're not losing most of your committee. In other words, you have some people that time out. They finish their 3rd year, they're done. But you've got 2/3 of the committee still over here that are in their 1st or their 2nd year, and they're coming, and then your nominations committee adds to the next class, and you always have a rotation of members, and it always keeps you with people that have experience and knowledge. They're nominated by the nominations committee. They're elected at a church conference. Anywhere between 5 and 9, no family or members of the staff. They need to be objective and faithful, should be in classes. They're nominated and they're elected. All right. So now, turn to the calendar. Almost done. Now, this is not, you won't find this in the Book of Discipline. This is a suggestion on my part. But this calendar lays out for you some of the proactive duties, the proactive responsibilities of the Staff Parish Relations Committee, and puts them on a calendar that, at least in my mind, makes sense. You might disagree, but in my mind, it makes sense. In January, you have new people coming on. Well, that's not true. And some churches bring their new officers on in June. You know, they've changed the calendar. But generally, at church conference, at the end of the year, we have new people joining trustees and joining the education committee, new people joining staff parish. So in January is a great time to do orientation so that the new members to the committee learn what the committee does, and the people that have been on it get reminded. February is a great time to talk about where we're headed. I just wrote the word SMART goals, but you can't write SMART goals without knowing where you're headed. But February is a great time to do that. Also, the springtime, March or April, good time to do some training or maybe some reading as a team. Maybe read a book about church growth. Maybe read a book about personnel management. Your pastor can help you. I could make suggestions. Right now, I'd recommend you read a book by Lovett Weems called Bearing Fruit. It's a book that helps us remember what we're about. And it's where I got that "so that" phrase from. Every team in your ministry should be asking the "so that" question. Your Sunday school teachers are using this illustration in their Sunday school class so that what? So that kids will have something to keep them busy? That doesn't fit with your ministry plan. So that they grow in their love of God. Now we've got some. So, training and reading sometime during the spring. April, good time to talk about ministry as a calling, because you got kids that are about to graduate, got kids that are sometimes about to be confirmed, and a great time to lift that up. May, a good time to start with staff and volunteer evaluations, because you can carry that through the summer, share in how you do that, but I put that down for May and June. July, a good time to be sure you're up to date on background checks. Might have to do that earlier if Bible school is in June. Sometimes Bible school is in August. But you certainly want to make sure that as you put together your Sunday school staff or your Christian ed staff for Wednesday nights, you want to make sure you've got background checks in place for all those people. So I said July. August, a good time to make sure your job descriptions are up to date and your church profile. You always want to pay attention to that. They go together, you know. If your profile reminds you what your ministry is, you know how to write your job descriptions. If you've just done your staff evaluations in May or June, your staff people will help you improve your job descriptions. Because they'll say, you know, in my job description it says I'm supposed to put out a weekly newsletter. But now I'm in touch with people by Facebook and email. So we should update that or change that. So evaluations do help you write better job descriptions. So job descriptions and church profile sometime in the summer or late August. September, you start thinking about nominations. Who should join our committee? Make some suggestions. Your nominations committee would appreciate that. You know the kind of work you do. You know what you're facing. You know what's coming. You know how it's going. You know what you need. Make some suggestions. Still up to the nominating committee, but they usually appreciate suggestions. Compensation, you start working on compensation. Somebody's going to find out about cost of living. Somebody's going to make sure how things are going with church finances so that when you come to a meeting to talk about compensation with your pastor or with your staff people, you understand why you have done what you've chosen to do with compensation. And then they understand also. That's valuable to get that done during September or early October. I also wrote October as Pastor Appreciation Month. You always want to be showing appreciation. A lot of people do that in October. Shouldn't just be your pastor. Somehow we ought to appreciate anybody that's in ministry and all of your staff, whether they're volunteer or paid. But pastor appreciation in October has value. Church conferences come up late in the year, but they always happen. Somehow you have to have your compensation package, the salary for your pastor must be approved by a church conference prior to December 1st. Now, this is because we send it in, and we have to have it sent in by December 1st. So that's why I list November as a time to make sure the salary's been approved at a church conference. And I also mentioned candidates. Remember when we mentioned that people were coming into ministry, they need your approval. They also need church conference approval. So we have that on the calendar just as a reminder. So that takes you through a possible year. The reason, hopefully by now, it's kind of aligned with one thing builds on the other in terms of being ready with where you're headed in ministry and what you have to accomplish in terms of relationships and decisions. I do want to mention a couple of pieces that help you that are available. These are listed. They should be more of a bibliography than footnotes, but Cokesbury produces something called Guidelines for Ministry. It has many pamphlets for different areas within the church, but one of them is about pastor-parish relations. So it's kind of a cliff notes, actually pretty comprehensive, about the duties of staff-parish relations. Also, of course, most of what we've talked about is listed in our Book of Discipline, and there's probably one of those on your church library shelf. If you really want to get into this, this is the Minnesota Annual Conference Staff-Parish Relations Manual. It's got 8 tabs, and I believe something just shy of 150 pages. I wouldn't tack it all in one night. But it does go into more detail on many of the topics that we've talked about as we made our way through this sheet. So there are resources like that available, and we just wish you well. Big job you have as a Staff-Parish Relations Committee. It's huge. Some only meet quarterly. If you can get it done by meeting quarterly, fine. But I don't know. I think every other month is almost minimum, and many meet on a monthly basis. It's not just to deal with conflicts, though, as you can see. It's to deal with where are we headed in ministry, and how do we team up with our staff people, primarily our minister, to accomplish ministry, so that the things that we do help people love God and love their neighbor. The things that we do actually help people reach others because we've been very clear with our staff of making that happen. And so the things that we do as a staff parish committee actually heal a broken world. Thanks for your work on the staff parish committee, and let's close with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, as we gather our hearts and minds around all of this work, we just are thankful that you have a compassionate view of us, and you would assist and guide and lead and forgive and call us forward as we attempt to be your church. Bless these who've been here tonight to take in this training and go with us as we head to our responsibilities within the church, as we manage and dream and move forward with our responsibilities with staff and volunteers in our churches. To this end, we make our prayers in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.